There is no event in recorded human history quite as tragic or fascinating as World War II. For most of the 75+ years since the Axis powers' surrender, returning to that battlefield has been impossible. That is until now, with today's proud sponsor, Call of War. Call of War is one of the hottest cross-platform PvP strategy games in the world, taking the player back in time to navigate one of the darkest hours of our existence. For Call of War, you will raise cities from the ground up, defend your homeland, trade with fellow conquerors, spy on traitors, and ultimately build your army. Most importantly, you will learn how to strategize within a campaign using one of the many technological advancements highlighted in-game. You can rush your tanks, engage with ground battalions, develop your air force, or even direct naval fleets to help you move across detailed maps in real time. Each campaign, considered a single game, takes weeks at a time to complete. There are up to 100 fellow players per map, based either on historical accuracy or fictional lands you must conquer. The buildings, ships, and secret technology, such as atomic bombs, are all researched to reflect the exact makes and models seen during World War II. There's also various types of terrain, economy systems that allow you to trade, and it's all backed up with regular updates and fresh, free content for anyone to use. Our favorite aspect of the game is the carefully constructed strategies you must master to achieve victory. It makes you feel as if you're in the control room for a real World War II campaign, an experience unlike any other. If Call of War sounds like your destiny, click on the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of the premium subscription for free. Offer only available for 30 days, so don't get caught in a dogfight. It's available on both PC and mobile devices, so get out there and conquer your enemies today to claim your victory. Since the collapse of the Third Reich, under the Allied armies rolling across Europe, many historians have looked back and tried to piece together the many legacies of Hitler's short-lived but supremely powerful fascist empire. The most obvious, of course, is the trail of blood it left behind as the Wehrmacht stamped across Europe, North Africa, and the Soviet Union. Another is the Third Reich's influence on the course of European history and how it changed the map of the continent forever, creating and dissolving countries, something which also extends to the Middle East and the impact it had on the eventual creation of the State of Israel. However, for the victorious powers of America, Britain, and the Soviet Union, in the immediate post-war period, perhaps the Nazis' greatest legacy was their technology. Few would deny that German weaponry was often decades ahead of the Allies, producing jet fighters, cruise missiles, super heavy tanks, and even long-range ballistic missiles, it being the sheer weight of numbers on the Allied side that tips the balance. All these technologies could have been available to many other countries before the war, but what made Nazi Germany so unique was that if its scientists could dream it in their twisted minds, they had an attentive audience in Hitler, who invested huge amounts of Germany's resources into building bigger and better machines, believing these would be the key to victory. This is the story of one of Nazi Germany's great wartime machines, its promise and its eventual fate. The enormous Messerschmitt Me 323 Gigant. Welcome to Wars of the World. The origins of this immense aircraft can be traced back to the dark days of summer 1940. France had expected to hold the German army out of its borders thanks to the immense Maginot Line. But ultimately this proved ineffective, as German troops either went around it by invading the Low Countries or over it, using the Junker Ju-52 transports to drop paratroopers and keep them supplied. The result was a stunning victory that caught even many of the German leadership by surprise at how swiftly France fell. But the problem now was that Britain refused to accept German dominance in Western Europe as Hitler had hoped, and vowed to continue the war, requiring the Fuhrer to order an invasion of Britain. Dubbed Operation Sea Lion, the plan was hastily conceived while the German Luftwaffe was still tangling with the Royal Air Force for control of the skies over England. Again, airborne units were expected to play a major role in the invasion of Britain, but with the English Channel providing a major obstacle to reinforcement, the airborne logistics effort was going to be gargantuan. As such, the Luftwaffe approached the Junkers and Messerschmitt companies to produce new, heavy-lift aircraft, specifically for this kind of operation. The specifications were demanding in the extreme for 1940, with the aircraft being required to carry either an 88mm anti-aircraft gun or a Panzer III medium tank. Very quickly, it was decided that to ease the burden on the manufacturers and reduce cost, the role could be fulfilled by a glider rather than a powered aircraft. Junkers put forward their Ju-322, which used an all-wooden construction, as was the case with many military gliders of the day, while Messerschmitt adopted a steel-framed design, skinned in fabric for the fuselage and wooden wings. The Luftwaffe ultimately selected the Messerschmitt design and originally designated the Me-263 before settling on the Me-321, this first taking to the air on February 25, 1941. Even by today's standards, the Me-321's specifications are impressive. The aircraft had an enormous wingspan of 55 meters, a length of 28.45 meters, and it was 10.5 meters high. For reference, this made it almost as long as a modern C-130J Super Hercules transporter, while its wingspan was considerably longer, possessing an additional 15 meters. To carry oversized loads, the fuselage adopted a bulbous design, which could also be reconfigured to carry 2 decks of up to 200 troops, and cargo was loaded via 2 large doors in the nose, which was fed up by a ramp. Up to 21,800 kilograms of cargo could be carried, this being almost 3,000 kilograms more than a C-130J. Initially, the landing gear was designed to drop away after takeoff, meaning the Me-321 slid on skids during landing, again not uncommon for gliders, but later versions would instead adopt a fixed undercarriage, making landings significantly safer. However, landing the Me-321 was only half the battle of operating this titanic aircraft. First, it had to get airborne, and like all military gliders of the Second World War, this regarded being towed into the air by a powered aircraft. In the Me-321's case, the preferred tractor aircraft was the Junkers Ju-90 airliner, but there simply wasn't enough of these to support the Me-321 fleet, so some radical alternatives were sought out. One such solution was found in the form of using 3 Messerschmitt Bf-110 fighters, one connected to the fuselage and one on each wing to tow the aircraft aloft, which would itself aid in the efforts thanks to 8 hydrogen peroxide rocket boosters bolted under the wings. It was an extremely complex operation that required perfect coordination for all involved, since one wrong move could spell disaster, as was tragically proven early in the glider's operational career, when the rockets of one aircraft failed to fire in equilibrium, pulling the giant aircraft off course and dragging the tug planes with it. In the ensuing crash, 9 airmen and 120 infantrymen were killed, making it the worst air disaster in history up until the New York mid-air collision in 1960. Another option was the Heinkel HE-111Z. Yes, it is exactly what it looks like. 2 Heinkel HE-111 twin-engine bombers joined together by a 5th engine in the middle. The HE-111Z was the best option when the Ju-90 wasn't available. However, again, there simply weren't enough of them to support Me-321 operations, just 12 being built, and 8 would be destroyed over the course of the war, either being shot down or caught by Allied aircraft on the ground. Once airborne, the problems for the crews of these impressive aircraft were far from over. Initially lacking powered flight controls, the immense aircraft was laborious to handle, leading to a second pilot being added to help take the strain, as well as motorized aids for the trailing edge flaps. Once released from the tug or tugs in the case of the Bf-110s, it was extremely slow, making it a sitting duck for a modern fighter aircraft when it entered service in 1941. While it had up to 4 7.92mm machine guns, these were bee stings compared to the 20mm cannons being fielded by 350 mph RAF Spitfires. and so it could only really be used effectively when the Luftwaffe had total air supremacy over the operational area, or at night in the early stages of the war. 200 examples of the Me-321, which became known as the Gigant or Giant, were eventually built, and they entered service just in time to support Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. The gliders were formed into special heavy glider squadrons, initially comprising of 6 Me-321s and 12 Bf-110 tugs, and while their heavy liftability was lauded by the German High Command, operational use of the aircraft revealed even more shortcomings. Using Bf-110s as tugs saw the twin-engine fighter suffering from higher than normal fuel consumption, resulting in a significantly reduced range for the Me-321, just 250 miles from its base, which was a major impediment when trying to support the invasion of the vast Soviet Union. Furthermore, many were damaged in landing accidents as pilots misjudged their approach, but being gliders, they were unable to go around for a second pass. However, the German leadership still believed in the capabilities of the design, and the answer to them was obvious. The Me-321 needed its own engines. Plans to transform the Me-321 into a powered aircraft began almost immediately upon its introduction to service. The question was, of course, what engines to fit to it, and being such a heavy aircraft, at least 4 were going to be required for each airframe. At this time, in 1941, the German leaders were getting increasingly concerned about the production of aero engines for the Luftwaffe. The assembly lines were needing to churn out thousands of power plants to help replace lost aircraft, introduce newer models to keep pace with the Allies, and pitted against this was competition for supplies with other branches of the German military, to say nothing of the disruption to production from RAF bombing. Therefore, the Germans decided to look elsewhere for power plants in order to limit the impact installing German engines on the Me-321. Having captured the French aero industry, they found a suitable engine in the form of the French GR-14N radial engine, which produced 1,164 horsepower, and work began on converting a single Me-321 to be powered by 4 GR-14Ns. This new aircraft was redesignated the Me-323 and inherited the Gigant name from its unpowered predecessor. However, very quickly, it was found to have inherited a few of the drawbacks of its predecessor as well. It still required assistance taking off, although now, with its own engines, it could at least fly further and more safely, and was able to return to base if needed. However, again, the Me-323 was painfully slow, having a top speed of just 130 miles per hour, and so the aircraft was redesigned again, producing the Me-323D, which featured an extra set of engines, bringing the total to 6. This went some way to alleviating the performance issues of the aircraft, but again, rockets were still used to assist in takeoffs. Entering production in early 1942, pilots reported a number of issues with the French engines, mainly concerning reliability, and numerous flights ended with the loss of one engine as they struggled to keep the Giant airborne. Also, if they had been left idle for some time, then they had a nasty tendency to catch fire when they were next restarted, if proper precautions weren't taken. Pilots did, however, praise them for being powerful enough to keep the aircraft under control, even if as many as half of them were lost in flight, providing they weren't all on one wing. Depending on what was being carried, range was more than double that of an Me-321, when towed by 3 Bf-110s, being a much more useful 500 to 600 miles. Recognizing their vulnerability to enemy fighters, the Messerschmitt engineers armed the aircraft with 5 13mm defensive machine guns, manned by 2 dedicated gunners, as well as the radio operator and the 2 flight engineers, who helped the pilots maintain the 6 engines in flight. Recognizing that this was still insufficient, Messerschmitt toyed with the idea of creating a dedicated escort variant, whose primary role would be to defend a flight of Me-323s from enemy attack. Dubbed the Me-323E2WT, This gunship variant would feature a redesigned nose, incorporating a turret armed with 20mm cannons, 2 additional wing turrets with cannons, and up to 10 machine guns mounted at key points along the aircraft. Just how effective this proposal would have been remains a debate for aviation historians, as despite 2 prototypes being built, each of which required a crew of 21 airmen to man all the guns, the Luftwaffe didn't pursue the concept, instead relying on traditional fighter escorts. "15 Me-321s were converted into Me-323s before new build examples began to appear off the assembly lines, and in total, 213 were completed, the first entering service in late 1942. At that time, Axis fortunes were beginning to change, particularly in North Africa, where Allied ships and aircrafts were strangling Germany's supply lines across the Mediterranean. As such, it was decided to employ the Me-323's enormous cargo capacity in running supply hops across the Med to Rommel's Afrika Korps. Crossing the Mediterranean in groups with heavy fighter escorts, flying the lumbering transports which could barely reach 136 miles per hour was a stressful time for the crews, knowing that the Allied air forces were growing ever stronger now that the US was engaged in the fighting, and despite the protection of the fighters, the Me-323s suffered appalling losses. Demonstrating its vulnerability, some were even lost to the defensive guns of maritime patrol aircraft that stumbled across them. By far the worst day for the Me-323 crews came on April 22, 1943. A formation of 27 Me-323s were assembled over the Sicilian Straits, escorted by Luftwaffe Bf-109s and Italian C-202 fighters. This awe-inspiring sight was part of the Luftwaffe's desperate effort to get fuel to the Afrika Korps, who were effectively being starved into submission by the Allied blockade of the Mediterranean Sea. Having detected the formation, the Allies dispatched a force of South African Air Force Spitfires and American-supplied B-40 Kitty Hawks to intercept them. Finding the Germans flying in an immense V formation led to the Allied pilots describing them as a flock of geese, the SAAF fighters setting upon them and their escorts near Cape Bon off the Tunisian coast. It was a massacre. 21 of the flying giants were destroyed in the melee that followed, leaving only 6 to limp to their destination. It is important to note, however, that this disaster cannot be placed entirely on the Me-323's shortcomings. 4 days prior, in the same vicinity as this engagement, Allied pilots set upon a force of 100 Ju-52 transports and their escorts, destroying over half of them. Allied air superiority was just too strong at this time, and following these defeats, the Germans resorted to night flights only, but this offered little respite, as radar-guided Allied night fighters set upon them with the same vigor as during the day. Less than 1 month later, the Afrika Korps surrendered, bringing an end to the Mediterranean gauntlet, allowing the Me-323 force to be transferred to support the Eastern Front, where the Red Army was making slow but steady progress in pushing back the Axis invaders. While its heavy cargo lifting ability was appreciated, the Luftwaffe had lost confidence in the Me-323, and so tried to keep them operating as far behind the lines as possible, making them a second-line asset. Efforts were being made to address the aircraft's problems, particularly as the war became more desperate, and Messerschmitt's engineers produced a wide variety of proposals, ranging from the functional to the extreme. To address the lack of power from the French engines, proposals were put forward to replace them with more powerful German ones, such as the Jumo 211, but these failed to get beyond the trial stage. Perhaps the most fascinating proposal involved replicating how Heinkel made the HE-111Z, with 2 Me-323s being joined together by the wings. But this never materialized, and by April of 1944, orders for new aircraft were cancelled in order to divert the resources to fighter production. Attrition, coupled with a lack of spare parts, meant that while they were heavily utilized until they could fly no more, by the end of 1944, the Gigant had been completely withdrawn from service and scrapped. Sadly for historians and aviation enthusiasts alike, only one complete example survives today, albeit as a wreck in the sea near La Maddalena, an Italian island. It is difficult to judge the merits of the Me-323, since despite its high losses and shortcomings as an aircraft, it was able to move huge amounts of equipment faster than on land or by sea. As a transport aircraft, it could do the job it was designed to do, and had the Germans been able to establish an effective defense of the aircraft, then it would have been a highly useful asset. Unfortunately for the Luftwaffe, it arrived at a time when the Allies were wresting air superiority away from them, leaving the Gigant unable to fulfill its true potential. It is, however, interesting to ponder how the aircraft, with more powerful engines, might have impacted the civilian aviation world, particularly with the boom in air freight that was experienced in the immediate post-war era, as there was simply nothing else like it in the sky for many more years to come. And there you have the story of the Giant of the Sky. Once again, I'd like to thank Call of War, the free online World War II set strategy game in which you learn to fight in authentic campaigns, engage in battle, and conquer the world. Click on the link in the description to get 13,000 gold and 1 month of the premium subscription for free. The offer is only available for 30 days, so hurry up and fuel your 323 Gigants and download today.